Now, Rock Talk with Mitch Lafon.
We are speaking with writer Jim Vallance. He, of course, was part of the Scorpions' Crazy World album, as we say in Montreal. Bonjour, Jim. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good, good. Pleasure to see you. So, just before we get into Crazy World, let's talk about the actual real Crazy World that you've been a part of. You did Pretty Woman for Broadway, and of course it shut down. What has that done for you in terms of creativity? Do you just sort of go, throw your hands up in the air and go, oh well, or do you say, okay, well now I've got time to work on the next new project? Is it sort of a frustration thing, or is it more like, all right, it's freed up my schedule, whatever?
Well, I thought as the pandemic sort of when it became apparent that it was going to not be over soon, and we were all isolating, I pretty much stayed in my apartment in New York for like 4 months and didn't even leave. I thought, okay, the upside is what a great opportunity to do some writing, do some reading, maybe practice my instruments, maybe learn a new instrument, maybe learn a new language. Um, I have not put the time to good use. It just every day seems to go actually more quickly than previously. I'm a little disappointed. I thought I could actually make good use of this time, and I haven't. Not that I'm idle or not that I'm accomplishing nothing at all, but it's just not. I'm not filling the time. I think that to the best of my ability.
Right.
How are you finding it? Are you able to make
Well,
use of this?
I'm sort of in the same way, but I've been doing a whole bunch of interviews, and I just walk the dog constantly. We go on these 5 kilometer runs. That's the minimum. Sometimes we do 10, 12, and that's it. And I've caught up on a lot of TV shows I have never watched. So yeah, we're doing the best we can. So let's get back to Crazy World, the album. I mean, here we are 30 years later, right? 1990, 2020. For you, how do you think the album has matured? Does it still sound fresh? Does it still sound good? Do you look back and go, man, we got it? Or do you look back and go, well, and as most creators do, ooh, we should have tweaked this, we should have tweaked that. How do you look at it on its anniversary?
Well, I mean, Scorpions had a career arc. They had albums before Crazy World and albums after Crazy World. I popped into their lives for that one album, so really that's the context for me. So I mean, when I listen back to it, I think it's one of their better albums. I think it's well crafted, well recorded, well produced, well performed. Um, some music recorded especially in the '80s and even into the '90s, it sounds of the day. It's not timeless. It's of that time. But I think this album stands up very well. It doesn't sound, you don't listen to it and go, 1990. I mean, there's some, and I don't say this to be disparaging, but for example, Hall & Oates, you can listen to some of their music and go, sounds like 1986. There's like some sounds, from those days. So
Yeah.
I think in this case, I think Keith Olsen, got some sounds and some performances that are timeless. So sounds good to me, even all these years later.
I think part of that, other than the great songwriting, is the fact that they used real instruments in the sense that they stayed with guitars and real, acoustic drums. They didn't go into those fancy keyboards or the Simmons drums or the Lynn drums, because those are the ones that really date. You
Yeah.
hear that Lynn drum and you go, 1984, gotcha. you know. So quickly, before we get into it, I want to get over this because the hot topic these days has been this Winds of Change was written by the CIA to help subvert the Russian youth. I mean, have you?
What?
Oh, you?
I've not heard that.
Oh, you haven't heard that? Okay, so there's a series on. There's a podcast called the Wind of Change podcast, and they have gone through how the CIA wrote Winds of Change. you can I'll send you the link. And it was made to subvert the Russian youth and therefore help the Americans win the Cold War. So since you haven't heard about it, we'll quickly go over it. But what do you think about that?
I'm laughing. I mean, it's just preposterous, and especially in these times where Truth is at a premium. I mean, there's just so much misinformation, conspiracy theories floated as fact. I mean, so I guess it doesn't surprise me, but the fact that anybody would buy into that is just laughable. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and by the way, this was in the Guardian and this was in the New York Times. I mean, they all ran stories about it. So I will send you the link. It's a fascinating listen because you
Okay.
just sit there and you go, come on,
How recent is this?
from this year.
Okay, I'd be very interested in seeing that.
So I'm going to send that over. Okay, so let's get over to this. Talking about Russia, the Scorpions go over to Russia. They do the Moscow Peace Festival, and they do this Stairway to Heaven, Highway to Hell, Make a Difference Foundation benefit album. Bruce Fairbairn helps them do Can't Explain.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of a backstory there. On the Savage Amusement Tour, Scorpions don't show up to Vancouver, and they sort of say glibly, Vancouver's far, and they don't really have rock fans. I mean, that's not exactly the quote, but it was sort of like,
I
whatever.
remember that. Yeah.
Right. And so Bruce says, no, 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 no. You got to come over and you got to meet my neighbor, Jim Valance, and you got to just sort of see what you can do. Is that sort of, the Cliff Notes version of how the association came about? Bruce just said, hey, come meet my neighbor?
Well, kind of. I mean, Bruce and I go back quite a ways. So I met Bruce in 1973. Bruce was in a Vancouver band called Sunshine with a Y, Sunshine. And I got called up to audition. It was a jazz rock fusion band. And I got called up to audition on drums, and I got the job. So for most of 1973, I was in this band called Sunshine and got to know Bruce and some other people that later either joined or performed on the first Prism album. So Sunshine kind of morphed into Prism in some ways. And Bruce and I were the two constants. Bruce played trumpet in Sunshine, but produced Prism. And I was the drummer in Prism and also the songwriter. So Bruce and I go back that far. So fast forward a few years, 1979 or so, Bruce is starting to work as a producer. I think one of his first projects was Ian Lloyd, who was a singer for the band Stories, who had the hit Louie Louie. Um, or I think it was called Brother Louie. And Bruce brought me into that project. And then as the 80s unfolded, Bruce was brought in to do Loverboy and Bon Jovi, and then Aerosmith. And Bruce brought me into the Aerosmith project. Similar story. He literally brought Steven Tyler and Joe Perry. Because Bruce and I lived not next door to each other, but about 5 houses apart. Bruce brought Steven Tyler and Joe Perry over to my house, introduced us, and then Bruce left. He said, "See you guys later. See if you can write a song by dinner time," which we did. So that was another sort of great connection that Bruce brought to me. And then forward to 1990, a similar kind of thing. Bruce rang me up. Would you like to work with the Scorpions? And I said, yeah, I mean, I love the band. And so he brought, I believe it was Klaus and Herman were in Vancouver. So just back to your point, I mean, Vancouver was not a backwater. Vancouver was all through the 80s, it was like, and mostly because of Bruce Fairbairn, but bands came there,
Yeah.
like I mentioned, Bon Jovi.
Right. Well, and of course, and Little Mountain Studio. I mean, that
Yeah,
was the place. So you had Motley Crue, you had Lou Gramm sang on Bryan Adams' Reckless. You had just all kinds of stuff going on.
Loverboy.
Right. The drum sound. Right? We talk about the
Yeah,
drum sound. Aerosmith, Bon Jovi. I think
Payola.
AC/DC must have done some stuff there too. I think
I
so.
believe so. Yeah. So Bruce really kind of made Vancouver this place. So I don't quite know how the Scorpions glossed over that or missed it. But to their credit, they realized, well, okay, maybe Vancouver's worth a shot. So Herman and Klaus came around, and Bruce introduced them, and we had a chat. I can't remember if we did some writing. Yeah, we did a bit of writing right out of the gate. Yeah, I think we worked. I think Tease Me Please Me was the first one we worked on, And Klaus and Herman took that back to Hanover. I think that's where they were living at the time, and played it for Rudolph, who thought, great, this, I mean, no ego, no competition. It was just like, okay, Jim's in, which is very, very generous. And so then the next trip, Klaus, Rudolph, and Herman came back, and we really got down to work in my studio. We spent, I don't remember exactly how long, I mean, days, weeks, maybe on and off for a month or more, working on most of the songs on the album.
So let me just take you up on this real quick, because folks will look back and say, well, wait a minute, Bruce wasn't involved with this album. It's Keith Olsen. Just explain a little bit how Bruce was initially involved and why he didn't end up actually producing the album.
Well, I mean, it was a little disappointing. We were well along. We were writing, demoing, arranging, putting songs together, and AC/DC came calling. Arguably, one of the biggest rock bands in the world, and certainly a feather in anyone's cap, if for a producer. So AC/DC approached Bruce to produce, and Bruce bailed on the Scorpions. He said, "I'm going to do AC/DC." So the Scorpions had already shipped their gear to Vancouver. It was on the plane or on the boat, however it was getting there. It was too late to cancel. We were that far along, ready to go into the studio, and Bruce pulled the plug. Again, to everyone's credit, a year or two later, next Scorpions album, Bruce jumped back in, no hard feelings, and they carried on. But ironically, by that time, for the next album after Crazy World, Klaus called me to do some writing, and he said, we're coming over to Vancouver in October. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry. I'm working with, I forget who it was, a Joan Jett, I think. And Klaus said, well, cancel it. And I said, I no, I that's not my style. So I sadly did not get to work on the next Scorpion album.
Yeah, on Face the Heat, which, by the way, I think is one of the underrated albums in their catalog. But
it is good. It's very good.
Listen, songs like Woman, Unholy Alliance, I'm just looking at some of the Lonely Nights, I think are great tracks. But so Bruce goes and does AC/DC, and I have to say, as a fan, I can't bemoan of that. I mean, if you're saying, oh, I'm going to go work with a new rookie band instead of the Scorpions, I go, okay, maybe. But AC/DC, I mean, I probably would have done the same thing, be honest.
There's multi levels to that in terms of career moves versus ethics and so on. But we don't need to go there. It happened, and it all got resolved. I mean, everybody was happy in the end, and I think Keith Olsen did a fantastic job on Crazy World, so it all worked out fine.
Yeah, and let's take a quick minute to remember Keith. He passed away not so long ago. What did he bring to a project? Because you look back and we think about Mutt Lange, and we think about Bruce, and we think about these massive guys, Ron Nevison, et cetera, et cetera. What was it about Keith that he brought to a project?
Well, I was there for the sessions. I went down to LA for a couple of the recordings, and actually, as you know, played on a few things. I mean, Keith, first of all, was a lovely guy. He made the studio just a safe place. It was, comfortable. The vibe was always great. The energy was always high. He's an engineer. He had an engineer there, Erwin Musper, but Keith was, overseeing. And so, I mean, he's a music guy. He really understands music and arrangements and songs. So he was sort of the guiding light through all of that. He picked what songs were going to go on the album, and did some finessing in the studio. We had written, arranged, and demoed all the songs in my studio, and then Keith just took it to the next level.
Now, you're credited with 7 songs, but was there a lot more? I mean, did you write like 20 and they picked the best 7, or the 7 that fit on the album? Or did you write 8 and they picked 7? Or did you write 7 and that was it? You got lucky?
I think we finished 7.
Okay.
But, there were starts and stops. I mean, I've got a reel of tape somewhere in a box in my basement with fragments, I call them, a verse that never quite got married to a chorus, and a chorus that never quite got married to a verse. So all these little ideas and snippets and fragments, um, building blocks for songs. But we completed and arranged, ready for recording, 7 songs, to my recollection.
Now, and I know folks don't like the term, but were you brought in a sense as a song doctor where they came to you with these songs and you tightened them up, or did you sit down with nothing on the paper, all three of you, and create it all together?
Well, yeah, I really hate the song doctor
I know
moniker
everybody
because
hates that moniker.
I'm a songwriter,
Right.
but I don't just fix people's songs. But in this case, I mean, most of the songs, as I recall, were already started. I'm sure there might be one or two that we started absolutely from scratch. Um, but for example, Tease Me, Please Me, which, as I recall, was the first one we worked on, um, it was a completely different chorus. So the verse was pretty much intact as we know it today. And then it went off into a completely different chorus. And that was my first comment on hearing that first song was great verse, but the song doesn't launch, it doesn't take off, it doesn't go anywhere. So I largely rewrote the chorus, and again, I think it was me, Klaus, and Herman, and so that song, I think, became stronger as a result. I'm very chorus title oriented, um, and so I mean, I think that's what I brought to the table, and lyrically too. I mean, clearly the Scorpions, English is their second language, but they speak excellent English and write excellent lyrics. But I did some tidying on the lyric side too, just grammatically and rhyme wise and whatever else. But again, my recollection is many of the songs were well underway, and I just jumped in and wherever I thought there was a weak verse or a weak chorus that could use improvement, that was my contribution.
Okay, so that was the contribution, and we didn't speak about this in this interview, but we've spoken before, where you said that I think, if I'm correct, the magic for a song is you get the title first, right? You need a good title. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
not necessarily need it first, but certainly a title. My sort of test for a good song is you play it for someone who's never heard it before. You play them the first verse, the first chorus, stop, and say, okay, what's the title? And if they can't tell you the title, then I don't think you've done your job as a songwriter.
Listen, I agree. There are sometimes I'll listen to a whole song and the song will be called, Happy Halloween. You go, but you didn't mention Halloween once. What is that?
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I agree.
I mean, just as to digress briefly, I mean, a couple of examples of that. If you remember the song "Drops of Jupiter" by Train, great song. It ended up being a hit, but the chorus is "Tell me," so it should have been called "Tell Me," but somewhere buried in one of the verses is just this one phrase, "Drops of Jupiter," and they titled the song that. So what happened? The song starts to climb up the chart just because it's really good. But I think people are going in the record store and saying, "I'd like that song, tell me." And it's like, sorry, don't have that one. So anyway, for the second printing of that album on vinyl, the record company put a sticker on the outside that said, contains the hit song "Tell Me," and then in brackets, "Drops of Jupiter." So it was like fix it later. And
Okay.
another example was Tragically Hip,
Mm-hmm.
Lake Fever. I don't know
Right.
if you know that
Oh
song.
yeah.
Uh, Great song, but the chorus, nowhere in the chorus does it say Lake Fever. I think that's in one of the verses. Otherwise, a great song, and I think that song could have been a hit on both sides of the border if they hadn't tried to be clever with the title, just as you mentioned, a little too clever to just take a out of context phrase and pop that on
Yeah.
as a title.
I don't want to sound pedestrian, but you sometimes you just can't be clever. You just give them the song, give it the title, off you go. You listen to Aerosmith, "Dude Looks Like a Lady." You go, okay, dude, look, I got it, and
Truly,
off you go.
Yeah.
So you're down in LA with the band and you're working on it now. Are these songs sort of in a living moment where you get in the studio and Keith says, "Okay, I need more guitar here and I need more drums here and we need reverb or whatever," and then all of a sudden you have to sort of start reworking the choruses and reworking the lyrics, or did they, once you were done writing, you hand it off and that's it?
Yeah, there was, to my recollection, there was no rewriting in the studio. I mean, my mode of working, and I know Bruce Fairbairn too, is do lots of preparation and then go in and make the record. You don't spend weeks and months in the studio, especially back in those days when studios were charging, you know, $2,500 a day, and that was a bargain price. You didn't just sit around and, unless you were Pink Floyd and had endless budget, you didn't just sit around in the studio writing and rewriting. So I know that when we went in with Keith, the songs were written, arranged, and ready to go. And Keith added, some just little bits and parts here and there, and obviously made it sound great and got great performances out of the band. So that was his contribution, just the like the director of a film, making all the final cuts and final calls.
And final calls. Now, you are credited as playing keyboard on, looking at it real quick, Send Me an Angel.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Did they just not have a guy? Did you just have a great passage and said, "Oh, listen to this, you gotta," and they went, "Oh yeah, we gotta use it." How did you end up on the recording? And is there more to you on that recording, or is that just sort of that's it? A little bit of keyboard on Send Me an Angel?
Um, yeah, well, I mean, Scorpions don't have a keyboard player, so but when we were recording the demo in my home studio, I thought it needed a keyboard pad and some maybe arpeggiated parts, and so I added those. And Keith Olsen really liked it, and asked me that's how I ended up going down to LA for the sessions. Was Keith asked me to come down and replicate those parts on the album. So that was on Send Me an Angel and Wind of Change. I was only credited, for some reason, only credited for playing keyboards on one of them, but I actually played on both those songs.
Oh, so you were writing with the CIA then? I see what was going. um,
Well, I didn't. I think Klaus wrote Winds of Change on his own, if I
mm-hmm.
recall.
Yep.
Um, but actually, I mean, I actually lobbied for a small writing credit because I wrote the underscore for the bridge. So the chord progression, not the melody, not the lyric, but I wrote the chord progression for the bridge. And this is not deserving of a writing credit, but I also arranged the song, recorded the demo, played most of the parts, and then again went down to LA and played those on the album. But I mean, I know enough about where the line is drawn that there's songwriting and then there's just arranging, and arranging is never meritorious of a writing credit. But on Wind of Change, yeah, 10% would have been maybe nice and would have been merited, but Klaus said no, and I'm okay with that. I'm over it.
And you're
Well,
you're over it. Uh, uh, let me just quickly ask you about this in the recording process. They had, of course, worked with Dieter Dirks for, well, pretty much forever. I mean, we'll call it forever, but for at least a decade, they worked with Dieter. They had their method with Dieter. Dieter had their method with them. Was there any sense from you that working with Keith, they were nervous, they were stressed out, they were excited, like, oh my God, it's like a new toy in the toy box? Like, how did they sort of see that? Because they had a lot of success with Dieter, and so there was obviously some pressure that if you're not using Dieter and this one fails, well, it might fall on you. And of course, it doesn't fail; it becomes a massive success. But was there any sense of, oof, we're moving on. What are we gonna do?
I mean, I wasn't privy to all of the conversations
Right.
along those lines. That would have been a private band matter, and I'm sure they had some trials and tribulations making such a big change. But as I recall, just sort of as a fly on the wall, I think they were excited to try something new. I think they maybe felt Dieter had done great for them. I mean, he discovered them as kids, if I have the history correct, and guided them through the early part of their career. Was a huge contributor to their success, and that carried on for a number of albums. But I think they were ready for a change. I think they wanted to up their game, or at least try a different path. So no, there was no hesitation, no reservation about moving. I think, well, first of all, I think they were excited about working with Bruce because of Bruce's clearly, success with, Bon Jovi and Aerosmith and others. I think they were, and Bruce's sound, which again is not to take anything away from Bruce, but Bob Rock, who was Bruce's main engineer before Bob went off and became his own, producer and worked with Metallica and so on, and then Mike Fraser was also Bruce's engineer. He was Bob Rock's second engineer, and then when Bob went on to start his own career, Mike Fraser moved up and was Bruce Fairbairn's first engineer. So for all those reasons, the Scorpions were very excited about working with Bruce, and then I think when that fell through, not that Keith was a distant second choice, and he was clearly a great choice as well. But no, they were moving on. They were moving forward, not wanting to remain static or in one place. So it was all positive.
Very positive. It turned out well. I'll finish on these last two. You mentioned that you have some working demos and stuff. What's the process for you to get these demos to the band? Do you just sort of sit in your studio and play all the instruments and record it yourself and have sort of a finished working version that they can listen to and play off of? Or do you do the demos with the band? Or, how do you come up with whatever? I'm looking at the Kicks After Six or Tease Me, Please Me, or do you do your own version and say, here, guys, this is how I see it? How does that work?
I mean, sometimes, it's never the same. If you're talking specifically Scorpions,
Yeah.
that would be one answer. I mean, over the course of my career, I've written hundreds of songs with maybe 100 artists, and it's always a little bit different. In some cases, I will sketch out the whole thing, and I play all the instruments. I play guitar, bass, drums, keyboards. None of them virtuosically, but I'm a competent sort of rhythm player on all those instruments, so I can cobble a track together pretty good. Can't play lead guitar to save my life, but I'm a solid rhythm player, as is Rudolph. So Rudolph and I kind of bonded on that because stylistically he and I both have a very solid, chunky rhythm guitar style. So he and I were a good fit. I think with Tease Me, Please Me, I think I re-demoed that. Probably not playing drums, would have just been a programmed drums, not a loop, but I just literally play the drum kit on keyboards, and I would have played bass and guitar on that. That would have been maybe the first pass when it was me and Klaus and Herman, and then when Rudolph came over to Vancouver, obviously I deferred to him on the rhythm guitar parts. I recall playing bass and then some keyboards were appropriate. But yeah, no, I'm often my working process involves laying down a track, a very definitive arranged demo with sounds and parts and all of that.
Someday there's going to have to be a Jim Valance box set with all the working tracks of all the different bands from, What About Love to the Bryan Adams to the all that stuff. I'd buy two of them. Just real quick on Bryan Adams. He obviously went off and worked with Mutt Lange. Were you ever involved with Mutt Lange in a professional capacity where you wrote something for him or you worked for him?
Mutt and I collaborated early. So the arc of mine and Brian's career was we met in January 1978, worked almost daily. I mean, we worked very, very hard and very closely for 10 years. Mutt, sorry about my phone. Mutt became involved after Reckless, we tried to get Mutt on the Into the Fire album, which followed Reckless. Mutt was busy with Def Leppard. So the album after that, which was Waking Up the Neighbors, there was a period of time where me and Mutt and Brian were collaborating three ways. And then it's a long story and barely deserves repeating, but Brian and I we'd already started to sort of crumble our relationship creatively and personally after Reckless. So the whole Into the Fire album was difficult. We weren't really getting along. And by the end of that album, I think we were both just burned out. I mean, we'd spent almost every day together for 10 years. So, that's going to take a toll on any relationship. So it was actually a blessing. Mutt came in and brought some new energy and a positive vibe. But it was a little bit too late because Brian and I had already pretty much burned out. And then my son was born right around that same time. And that kind of, I kind of woke up and went, whoa, life is short. I'm not having fun right now. I think I need to move on. So I left Brian and Mutt to finish the album. I took a bit of a break, moved on to Aerosmith. And then, Brian and I were kind of estranged for, I forget, 5 or 10 years. And then we both kind of went, you know what, let's just patch this up. We're, life is short. You're my brother. Let's get back on track here. And we did. And to this day, we're still working. And then.
And you did The Pretty Woman together, the Broadway play. So
we did. And that was another very intense period.
Yes.
More intense than anything in my career. That was 3 years of almost every day writing 40 songs to get 20 because the director was very particular and very demanding. That was I would not do another musical. It's
I was going to ask you because you told me that once before, and you also told me about that you had the song and the producer accepts the song and then they go run it on stage and they do a dress rehearsal and then they go, yeah, it's not working on the stage and you have to go rewrite it and you're like, but we just got it.
Sometimes the song will stay in for 6 months and then the director goes, I'm not sure it's working. Or sometimes it's 6 days. But very arduous, very, very taxing process. I'm glad I did it because it was a challenge. And I think, I'm, how old am I? 68, 69, I forget. But but I think you need to keep pushing yourself and challenging yourself. And that was the reason I did that.
And I'll finish on the Mutt thing. I've always just found that Mutt is fantastic. You listen to anything that he's done, whether it's the Nickelback or the Shania Twain or Bryan Adams or whoever, Def Leppard obviously, and there's a sound. Not a lot of producers create necessarily their own sound with their own technique. A lot of them, they're very competent and they do great work, but a Mutt album is stamped Mutt Lange.
He is so brilliant. He's just focused. He's a lovely guy, but just a genius, a studio genius. He just and he's meticulous. He'll do a part over and over and over and over. People say nothing's perfect, but I think Mutt pursues perfection like right to the last sort of atom. He doesn't stop until it's to his standards, and his standards are very, very high. But I love Mutt. He's just a sweet, sweet man and just remarkable talent.
Oh, I absolutely agree. But we've all heard the stories of, the drummer will be in there for 11 hours and they'll go, great, we have that one cymbal sound. And you're like, what? One cymbal?
Yeah.
But
it's one way of working. But then, Mutt is also, go all the way back to Highway to Hell. He got those amazing performances out of AC/DC. And when I asked him about it, like, how did you make those records? He said, I didn't do anything. I set up the record, I set up the microphones, and they played. It's like, well, I'm not sure that's really true, but those are great records too. And a band performing off the floor. I mean, just whereas later on, I think Mutt got more as the technology got more finicky, digital and so on. I think it opened up avenues for Mutt where he could really indulge his sort of OCD focus, and that's why maybe previously he would have had a band play, 4 takes off the floor. I'm so sorry about that.
No worries.
And then subsequently it was like, okay, let's do the symbol 200 times until it's right. But I've never cared how records were made, whether it was people say, oh, the monkeys and the animals didn't play on their own records in Herman's Hermits. I don't care. I don't care who played on them. I don't care how they did it. They're great records. And whether you're, Mutt Lange or who does 200 takes, or Steve Lillywhite who does 1 take, it's the end result that we end up with and love. However we got there.
I absolutely agree. And for me, there's a lot of bands. I think Bon Jovi would have been a great fit with Mutt because they like that slick stuff. I think the Scorpions, especially back in the 90s or late 80s, would have been a great fit with Mutt. There's so many bands I would just love to see have them Muttified, if I can say that.
Yeah.
And maybe someday, Mutt's still out there, that maybe the Scorpions can head over to Switzerland and set up shop. Who knows? On that,
in one song, just like you did with Nickelback, or just one song would even be great. Muse, you work with Muse. Yeah, that would be a great fit. Mutt and Scorpions.
Yeah, Mutt Scorpions would be great, and Mutt Bon Jovi would be great because they have that commercial sound. Anyway, let's just quick finish on this then. 30 years of Crazy World. I don't know what I was going to say there. 30 years of Crazy World. Final words on the album?
It was fun. I really enjoyed the guys. I mean, the memories are, just not just writing and recording and the work in the studio, but the times we spent outside the studio. Dinners in Vancouver, hanging out with the guys, having lunch. They're funny guys. They're really entertaining and just great folks to hang out with. And Herman and I, bonded, I think, more than the others because we're both drummers at the heart of it. In fact, we would go out for dinner, and this is back in the 90s when restaurants, it was fashionable to serve, charge way too much and serve very, very small portions. If you remember that phase of sort of restaurant kind of style. So Herman and I would go out for dinner, and Herman's a big guy, not overweight, but he's a big man. And it was never enough food. He would always order a second main course, and I would often do the same. So in German, Herman and I dubbed ourselves two hungry drummers, which in German, if I remember, is zwei hungrig Trommler or something like that. So that was our sort of private joke. And then I went and visited Herman at his place in France. So the other guys lived in Hanover, and Herman lived in the south of France. Beautiful house, looking over the Mediterranean from sort of halfway up a mountain. I mean, just beautiful. And the one thing I remember is if you looked that way, you saw Nice, and if you looked that way, you saw Italy. So around 6 o'clock, Herman says, "What do you want to do for dinner? French or Italian food?" He said, "If you want French food, we'll drive to Nice. You want Italian food, we'll drive to Italy." Literally, it would have been 15-minute drive in either direction. So life was good in Herman's hood.
Wow. My uncle, until he passed away, lived in Nice, actually. And my grandmother, until she passed away, lived in Antibes, right in that area. So we spent our summers in the south of France every year. And as they say, right, God's country, right? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Anyway, as always, toujours un plaisir, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking your time to go over Crazy World, such a iconic album. I think that's the proper term for it. It's an iconic album. People really know it. And certainly it's an iconic song. I mean, when you say Winds of Change, they go, right, Scorpions, Berlin Wall, it's a historic song.
Yeah, send me that link.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna send you the Guardian link. I'm surprised you didn't see the story, but it ran in the New York Times, it ran in Rolling Stone, it ran in Billboard, every major, it's not like the conspiracy nut websites that ran it. It's the legitimate news that ran it, and you have to go listen to the podcast that the guy put together with it, Mr. Keefe, I think his name is. It's 8 parts. And by the end of the 8 parts, you sort of go, yeah, maybe. It's compelling and convincing.
These things are out there, and just the slimmest evidence, and they just, can run for miles with it. I mean, I've got some ongoing online disputes with people, theory conspiracists who claim that Ringo didn't play on anything. Bernard Purdie played on all the Beatle tracks, and I mean, it's just, and Bernard Purdie himself has stoked those conspiracy theories, which I think is rather shameful considering what a great drummer he is, and sterling reputation. He doesn't need to buy into that. But there's all kinds of crazy stuff out there.
Yeah, and the whole. Someday I'll need to explore on an episode all the ghost musicians, because Kiss in the '80s, you didn't, and it happens. Of course, Milli Vanilli and blah 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 blah. But like you said, a good record is a good record, and a good song is a good song. And how it got to be, who cares?
Well, include me in that chat, because I've got lots of thoughts on it, and that's been one of my sort of hobbies too. Is like who played on what, and love it.
I love that stuff. Merci, monsieur. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mitch. Good to see you always.
Absolutely. Let me just stop the recording. There we